Good afternoon, Louise.
Hello, Ninder. How are you?
It's a glorious day.
It is a lovely day.
In fact, I think this is the first podcast I'm doing where I've opened the window and let the air in.
Well, I've got building work outside, so I have sadly had to shut the window or it's going to get too noisy. So there we go.
That's a concern of mine because I'm expecting a delivery from Amazon, and we'll chat about Amazon and digital in a few minutes. So I do wonder if I'm going to. Anyway, listen, that's an issue for another day. So, well, look, Louise, thank you very much. I've known you for a while because you've been a judging on part of the judging panel for the Signature Awards. But for those of you who don't know you, let me explain who Louise is. So, your career has been in property. You were the first, and we'll chat about diversity, the first female woman to become the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, a bit of a mouthful, global president in 2014-15. You've had some really major positions in property, including Acados. You're a non-exec, and you've run your own business as well, so you know all about running your own business. You're a non-exec director at Polypipe Group, Land Trust, Greater Birmingham LEP, the L&Q Group, the Trustee of Birmingham Museum Trust, Birmingham City University. You're a CBI board member, and there's lots of other things, but we just don't have the time to tell. But what I do know is you've got so many doctorates as well, and I'm going to mention one particular one, which is Wolverhampton University, because I'm a board governor, so I'm a bit biased there.
You are.
But I do know you're a governor at Birmingham City University, another great university in the region. And I'm going to be honest with you, you've had so many awards. We could spend the next 40 minutes chatting about it. So if you forgive me, I'll ask people to go to your LinkedIn and they can read all about your awards. But listen, it's a great honour and a great pleasure to have you. And I think this is probably the right time to chat to you because we've now got a roadmap that eases lockdown. We now need to understand how the property market's going. Now, people might say, well, why do we need to know about the property market? Well, actually, the property market's quite a good proxy for the UK economy.
Very much.
We all need to live somewhere. We all need to go to work somewhere. So property is sort of part of the community's DNA. So it's important we understand that. But I think it's probably more important we understand what the property market looks like going forward because of COVID. And so that's why I think it's pretty opportune, particularly with the roadmap, that we have a chat with you. And of course, you've written a great article around digital in the latest issue of the Business Influencer. So for those of you who haven't read it, go to the website or DM me and you can read the wonderful words of Louise. So let's kick straight in. Louise, just for me to get a grip around this, because diversity is such a big issue at the moment. And I've already explained the sort of senior positions you've had. So I suppose what and this is important because we need to know where the future of property and so forth is. What took you into construction, planning, development, and how did you find the climate? Because I wouldn't have thought at that point there were many women.
There were very few women in it. And I'm going to give you a very brief overview just to show you how far we've travelled and how far our community's travelled. I got into the land property construction world because I'm really a failed engineer. I wanted to do engineering when I set out on my career, and I got really not very good A-levels. And so I had to give up my career, my aspirations to be a mining engineer. And I had to use what I had, which is now back in the very early 80s. And I thought, well, what do I like? I really liked applied geography, human geography, people geography, not the green geography, the human geography and economics. So I ended up using my A-levels and I went to Sheffield Poly, and I got on a course called Urban Land Economics, which is basically applied geography. And it was all to do with the built environment, property, land, development. And through that, I was introduced to the RICS, Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, And it opened the doors into my career into property development, land, and particularly planning and development, which is what I specialised in as I finished my course at Sheffield. So that basically was how I got into it. It's sort of, and to be honest, an awful lot of people in property come into it either because they've got parents who work in the same sector, or because they didn't go down their chosen choice, back when they were doing their A-levels and making those decisions, and ended up in property by default. That's no bad thing, because the people who stay in the property and development world are people who really want to be there. They want to make a difference. And I've been really lucky in the breaks I've had after Sheffield Poly. I had a variety of different jobs, but it took me abroad. And I ended up working in Africa and Asia. And through that, I got a very nice role working for the United Nations. So lots of opportunities came my way. I specialised in planning and development. I had a fantastic time in East Africa with the UN. It was with Habitat, which is the human settlement department, if you like, a massive department. And through that, I sort of saw a bit more of the world. I did like I'm a bit of a cartophile, so I love maps. So anything to do with travelling, anything to do with geography, I love. So cut a very long story short, I came back from abroad and started working for Bryant's here in the development world. I'd done some stints with Birmingham City Council and Coventry City Council. And I got to a point where I thought, do you know what, I'd really like to run it myself. And I set up my own consultancy. And that was in the 1990s. And basically grew that company and ended up growing it to a point where I sold it. Eventually sold it to Arcadis, which is when I became a partner at Arcadis. Stepped down from the partnership at Arcadis 2 years ago now to take up a whole range of non-exec roles, all linked to the built environment, all linked to social value, planning, strategic development. And all the way through that journey, there has been a really strong feel for EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. So I think you were getting at the fact that I'm really quite long in the tooth, and that when I started in this career, there weren't many women in this profession. And I know, I'm not trying to make up the rules. There were 2% of the construction property development world were women. It is much better today. It has come on so far. It's not perfect. But neither is the legal career, neither is accountancy. You're always going to have, there's a catch-up. The fact with the construction industry is that the catch-up has been quick. There are more and more women, more and more from the BAME community. It is becoming a far more diverse sector. And I'm really proud to have been part of that journey. I mentioned the RICS earlier, and I did. Yeah, I was very, very proud and was the right person at the right time in the right place. And I took the global presidency now 5-6 years ago, so it's going back a little bit. But one of my platforms, I had 2 platforms that I took that role on. One was looking at the surveying profession across sub-Saharan Africa, and the other one was diversity and inclusion. And I'm really pleased that some of the initiatives that were started back then have not only continued, but have made a difference as well. So we have come on so far and so quickly. And there are a lot of urban myths about women in the construction industry. They're urban myths. If you're a woman, you want to work in the construction industry, it's a fantastic industry. There is absolutely nothing stopping you.
Well, I mean, that's fantastic to hear. I was listening to some news today about trying to get more diversity with non-exec directors, and obviously we just rattled off a number of positions you've got, and that sort of indicates how far that's got as well. So, and Louise, I talked to a lot of people, and they said you were instrumental in pushing the diversity. Right. So well done on that. So now, moving forward, I mean, I'm really pleased you've said that, because obviously research shows that during COVID, 2 particular or three really, sort of segments of the market have suffered. Ethnic minorities, young people, and of course, women have suffered some of the roles where they've been asked to, you know, the man's taken the position and gone, and women have had to look after the children. So it's great to hear that despite COVID and some sort of tension over that kind of issues.
There's tension, and it was the same in the recession. The last two recessions we had, the biggest sector, the biggest part of community that were hit the worst, if you like, were women, because at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, you know, there is always going to be a split of who does what. I'm really pleased that the research that has looked back at the last year has shown that working from home is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but it is interesting to see how the sharing of domestic work has improved slightly. There are always going to be the extremes, but you know, with you know partners working at home, they might be looking after kids at the same time and homeschooling, but there is becoming a far more realistic view of sharing work. And so there are always going to be some horror stories, but there is some positive trends that are emerging out of COVID, not least of which is the sort of the hybrid way of working from home and being able to adapt to using the technology that is clearly at our fingertips.
So talking about technology, talking about working from home, you've seen many cities now. You've just given us an idea of sort of the global reach you've had. So let's look at cities now, because that's obviously where a lot of built architecture and built environment is focused. So what does the role of the city look like, bearing in what you've just said, the role of digital, hybrid working, and of course, transport's played a role because people were not willing to get on public transport because they weren't sure what they were getting on. Let me just give you some data. There's a report by Paul Myson and I think Nick Bloom, who've said in their survey, people have said they'd prefer to work 2 days a week at home. Twitter have said to people, you can work forever from home for life. Goldman Sachs have said, no, you're all coming back in. Well, listen, we're having you 100% back. So mixed messages.
There is.
Well, what do you think? What the role of cities and offices?
Okay, cities and offices will continue. There will always be a need for centres for commerce, for meeting, and cities, it means community. And so the feel of, let's call it either a city centre or a town centre or a retail centre, they will continue. They will adapt. And retail clearly has adapted. You know, there's no getting away from it. You're waiting for an Amazon delivery. I'm waiting for deliveries all day. It saves me having to get in my car, drive into Derby or drive down to Birmingham and, you know, pick up or search for things. I can go online, I can click a button and they come like that. It is inevitable. Does it mean the demise of the high street? No, it doesn't. It will just be a change in the high street. And those high streets, whether or not they're city centres or town centres or rural centres, will still become hubs for communities. And it will be more on the cultural, the leisure, the retail side, but they will still be places where people get together. And where people get together, there will always be that opportunity to sell, to share, to shape, to laugh, to sing, to whatever. But, you know, you go back to when communities got together originally, you know, people were there because they wanted to exchange ideas or exchange goods. That will continue. There are lots of regimes at the moment to try and, how can I say this, perpetuate the sort of the ladybird book of, you know, what a high street should look like. You know, that sort of wonderful tinted picture of, you know, the perfect high street. And I'm not convinced that you know, every high street will and should remain as it always has. They will become mixed uses. They will have more more residential in there. They will have some retail. They'll have a lot more leisure and a lot more culture. And that's no bad thing. So I think that you did mention offices. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
The office market will also change. You know, you and I both can name so many large organisations that are reviewing their office footprints. How many desks do they actually need? Arcadis have just gone through it. You know, how many desk spaces do they actually need in one place at one time? How much hot desking can take place? This isn't new. This has been taking place over the last 5, 6, 7 years. But equally, there is still investment in offices, in improved office, you know, how offices feel. There will still be a need for offices in some of those central areas. And there's still investment and development coming through. I mean, there was one that hit the press yesterday in Birmingham, you know, a stunning building. Investment is still coming through for offices. So the office isn't dead. The high street isn't dead. It will just be a slightly different model. That's all.
Do you think we've seen the last of anchor tenants? Do you think that those days have gone? I'm looking at Debenhams have gone down, Topshop have gone down, John Lewis, Santander, 111 branches.
Yeah.
16,000 shops have closed according to the Centre of Retail Research. Has the anchor tenant now gone forever?
I'm not going to pretend to be a retail expert. I don't think it'll be one size fits all. I think that if a particular location can offer the right sort of market to those large anchor stores, then great. But for the likes of John Lewis to start questioning what is going to be the correct retail model going forward, you have to start thinking, really, is it actually going to be, you know, are these large mall-type shopping centres the Intos of this world, are they really going to be able to survive, or are they actually going to be those hybrids of some office, some resi, some culture, some retail? So I think it's just the shape of them that's going to, the nature of them is going to change.
We know the Internet of Things. We just spoke about Amazon a few minutes ago. We know the Internet of Things has changed life as we know it. It will continue to change life as we go forward. We know 5G is coming.
Yep.
So what role do you think digital will have on the sector itself, on the high street, the whole shebang when it comes around to architecture property? Where's digital going to take us?
It's going to take us a long way and very quickly, simply. The government, for once, is pretty switched on this. Politics aside, the white paper that came out last year, the planning white paper, put digital very high on the agenda, and the government, although it's had its hands full over the last year, is putting its money where its mouth is, and only last week came out with tender proposals to be able to digitise the plan-making process for the UK. So they've actually advertised a series of potential pathfinders, i.e., you know, people who are local authorities who are actually going to strike out and see how far digital improvements, digital technology can improve the plan-making process. Now, I'm highlighting it because the impact of digital on the planning system is going to be huge, and the authorities that don't, and we're talking local planning authorities, that don't embrace this or don't recognise it or work with partners to try and achieve it will absolutely be left behind. You very kindly mentioned the piece I did for the magazine, and in it I look at how far we've come. I mentioned John Noakes and then I mentioned Tom Cruise, so you know it's not all boring IT stuff, but you go back, you know, only a few years to technology when we began our careers, and now look at it. Just imagine what's going to happen in the next 5 years, and just take one tiny little part of our working environment planning. The impact of digital on how plans are made using real-time data, how buildings can be designed and illustrated through BIM, that's building information modelling, how planning, just how the administration of the planning system, I'm only picking on planning, I'm not talking about construction yet, but the administration of planning can be so much better, more accurate, quicker, using fewer people, but with more IT skills. You're going to be able to have far more adept and agile planning departments. So you're not going to be wasting a huge amount of money on very old-fashioned admin. So if you can make those changes to the planning system, in parallel, you've got huge changes coming through in construction with modern methods of construction, digital designing, digital planning. We can design and build new homes. I'm not saying instantaneously, because that would be very silly of me to say that, but modern methods of construction and modular build can considerably speed up the construction industry. So you've got a regime to get stuff out of the ground. You've got digital means to be able to improve how we build and what we build. You've got improved technology behind procurement processes, and that together creates a far better, quicker, more efficient development industry.
Now, let me just throw a spanner in the works. I think that sounds fantastic. My experience of tech is mixed. So the Amazon system is fantastic, but often when you're trying to get something complicated through and you're met by a series of links that take you to another link and another link, but there's no voice at the end of it, and you're wanting feedback and there's no way of getting, you know what I'm saying, it just takes you from a loop. And you think, crikey, why can't they just have someone at the end of a phone who will answer my question? And sometimes the forms are difficult and it crashes and you start to... So I think with planning, you're absolutely right. We can't ignore what's happening in front of us. We have to... I mean, one of the problems that's kept cities and many projects back is the old-fashioned way of doing planning. So I think my only caveat would be 100% we adopt it, but there should be a fallback plan where somebody can pick up a phone. That's all.
I think that's human nature, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it will be a mix of good use of technology, but with human interaction. And, you know, you're not going to get somebody at the end of that line saying the computer says no. You're going to have a real person because, you know, with all the artificial intelligence in the world, you still need people to run the system. We've still got a democratic process in this country in terms of local government. So you're still going to have a means of individuals representing the community being able to make decisions in a democratic way. So you're going to have this mix. It's not all technology. It's not going to be all the old-fashioned, you know, smoky rooms with, you know, a whole group of middle-aged white men making decisions. You know, it has moved on, and I think that we're in a really good place. We've got a government. We forget the politics. We've got a government and Westminster and departments, the CLG, communities and local government department, who are committed to this embracing of technology. You've got Homes England, who've embraced it so strongly. They are really moving forward with partnerships, with the use of digital technology, with city analytics. So it's looking at real-time information, like I mentioned before, to look at how plans can come forward for an area that are actually making sense and they're not 10 years out of date before they're adopted. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's an awful lot of skill out there as well of people who actually want to make it work.
I think, Louise, we can't ignore digital. We can't ignore the future. And we certainly have got to look through the lens of the next generation for whom technology is part of their DNA. And we've got a plan for the future. It's not what we want. It's what the next generation's going to... And quite frankly, they're going to drag us through it screaming and kicking. So I 100% agree with you. Do you see any blockers to this change? Because it's quite a dramatic change for people who've been in...
It is.
I think it's quite archaic. It's quite archaic and traditional.
Oh, very, very, very. I mean, historically, owning land was, there's a certain group in the community that owned land, and that's why property has historically been a male-dominated area. You go back, hundred years, it's only 100 years, but, you can see why the property development world has such a old boys network, matches, it has moved on. Let's say that now. So it is in many places seeped with an old-fashioned culture, and the biggest blocker is making people aware of the changes and that they're good changes, not bad changes, but then for them to be able to embrace the cultural change, because it really is a cultural change. I can't speak about the legal profession or the accountancy profession, but I can speak about the property profession. And the changes are happening, and they are happening quickly. But the biggest blocker is culture, is the sort of the hidden, not ignorance, because that sounds really rude, but in a way it is ignorance of realizing that you do have to start looking things with a very different and more open mindset. Having broader, more diverse views in the boardroom and at middle management and at grassroots level makes a massive difference to how companies operate. And it's that cultural change which is the biggest blocker. If we can get through that quicker, it will really help. It will really help.
So let me ask a question. This is very particular to me, because I'm the chair of the Wolverhampton Towns Fund, and we hear about how public and private sector, when it comes to property, are at loggerheads always. We're talking about problems around housing, planning, green belt, brownfield. So how can the public and the private sector work together, to get rid of these sort of, things that sort of stop making things happen? How can we get private and public working together?
I think it actually comes down to a better degree of trust between public and private, and an awareness of everyone is actually out there to do the same. They've all got the same goal at the end of the day, to actually create a better built environment for our communities. And I think one of the benefits of a digital approach, particularly in planning and development, is the transparency. Because you will then move away from those smoky deals behind, closed doors. And what actually happens, out on those building sites will be transparent. People will understand why a certain development is coming through, and it's of a certain nature with a certain land use, and it's a certain height. And the viability behind all of those schemes will be transparent. People will be able to understand, why have we got this massive tower block here? Why haven't we got, 10 semi-detached little houses? Because it's not viable to do 10 little semi-detached. We have to be able to build a tower block with a certain number of units to make it a viable proposition. And by doing that, they then can release funds for infrastructure in the area, for what was is at the moment, but they will change to Section 106 obligations, i.e. giving back to the community, i.e. paying for some of the impact of development. And if that is transparent, then there is certainty not only for the developer, because they know what they're letting themselves in for when they go into a planning application and then through all the way through to development and completion. But then the community also know what's happening, because they can see it and it can be understood, and it isn't all behind closed doors.
Yeah, because we do. I mean, the press is full of. There was this lobbying of this minister, lobbying of that minister, and listen, here's a text message sent from somebody to somebody, and can you believe it? After this dinner, this planning permission was given, and
yes,
and the phone calls and anyway.
And there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of spin. There's a lot of politics. There will always be politics, whether or not it's a local level or at the high table at Westminster. But the more things are transparent and visible and challengeable, the better it will be for whatever side of the fence you sit on.
So looking forward, got a couple of questions for you. So looking forward, we've been discussing COVID. So there's going to be a lot of changes. Without a shadow of a doubt, you've spoken about people, even at Arcadis, looking at desk space and how many times you come in, the implications for the transport system, or do they run as many buses, do they run as many trains as they used to, the implications for those people who are in part of the supply chain, the little tea places, the coffee places, all this kind of impact. But there must be positivity in terms of what new opportunities that might arise because of COVID. So how can we capitalise on some of those changes?
Embrace them. Don't be frightened of the change. Retail models of any, whether you're selling services, whether you're selling cups of tea, whether you're selling, you're a cobbler shop, and your previous clientele were all those office workers. You've got to change your model to fit the circumstances. If those circumstances change and there are fewer people potentially in a city centre or a retail centre or town centre, then your model changes. And there are lots and lots of examples of where retailers or service providers have changed over the last 12 months. They've gone out to serve the customer where they are. Look at the number of restaurants. Some restaurants are going to go to the wall. We know that. Other restaurants have carried on and they have looked at delivery systems. They've looked at being able to take their food, still cook their food, not serve it in their restaurants, but take it out to their customers. Those are the restaurants that are going to survive. And they may well continue with that service as well as opening their restaurants, in May, or it is May, I think, when we can be opening restaurants. But the best businesses, the most successful businesses adapt. It's as simple, they've adapted over, the last God knows how many hundreds of years. They will continue to adapt. It's just that adaptation has to happen a lot quicker.
And it'll be interesting how the relationship between landlords and tenants in cities will change, on how duration of leases will change, and whether the model of rather than a fixed cost might be linked to turnover. And there's all kinds of different thinking going on now.
I haven't even started on the property side and, the various tenancy agreements and all the rest of it. And if there's ever an archaic system, my goodness, it's that. And you're right. But, and the whole of that relationship, landlord and tenant relationship, clearly is going to have to change, because landlords will miss out because they won't get any tenants. So they have to adapt. So there's all sorts of different parts of this built environment sector, which is going to have to continue to move very, very quickly.
So now we've referred that it's very intrinsic that government plays a role. Government's always played a role locally in terms of the way they give planning permission. Government regionally, we've started to think about regionally. You talked about the Greater Birmingham LEP. We're talking about the Midlands engine, how it tends to see a much wider patch. But of course, nationally, what they decide in Whitehall makes a difference.
Of course it does.
Yes, some might argue where it's not fair, they haven't taken local, regional variations, but I think there needs to be some kind of understanding how the UK looks like. So if you had a magic wand, what would you like the government to do right now for the property and the sort of the marketing and the way they look at place as an entity? So a magic wand, it's, maybe now's the right time to look at this because everything's in a flux, and maybe now's the time to look at everything that is possible.
It's a really good question, because if you'd have asked me a week ago, my answer would have been for the government to stick to their guns over the planning white paper that came out a year ago, stick to their guns over digital and the amount of emphasis that they're putting into modern methods of construction and the funding behind all of that. what has really got my goat over the last few days is the decision, I think, that's come out of government, central government, down to local government, to say you don't need to continue with all the digital meetings. Forgive me, but that's ludicrous. If there's been ever an improvement in being able to use the technology, it's with digital and virtual meetings, particularly for local government. And I think that the decision to not emphasise to continue that is just appalling. So I would like government to stick to its guns over the white paper and the changes to the planning system, but not use the planning system and as the sort of the panacea to, oh, this will solve everybody's problems in property, because it bloody well won't. It's only one element of the sector, because what we also need to do is make sure we look again at the land supply chain, looking at strategic land, how it is played. We need to look at procurement of services, how to use digital and BIM and all of the good stuff that's coming out of the technological wizardry that we've got at the moment to improve the procurement processes, and to look at modern methods of construction and not be frightened of them. There are so many facets of the property world which all can come together. Now is a very good time to do it, and government need to stick to their guns, not fall backwards, not say we haven't got enough time to sort out the rules and regulations of that. We've come so far through COVID. We've learned so much. We've had to move very quickly. Let's not go backwards. Let's use the positives that have come out of the last year.
If you don't mind, let me just probe a couple of those areas, if you don't mind. Just remind for those who may not know, what do you mean by modern methods of construction?
Modular. It means building. Building units, not necessarily in situ, but making the bits of a building in a factory quickly, efficiently, sustainably, and then bringing them to a site and putting them together.
It's okay. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it because I'm a board member of the Green Square Accord.
You can put the infrastructure in, and it also means looking at sustainable infrastructure, looking at how we get to these locations. It's not necessarily all by car; it can be by electric vehicle. In any event, it's looking at some of the improved rail and rail links into areas. So that infrastructure, the sustainable drainage systems, can all go into a site, so it's serviced. And then the units themselves are fabricated in a factory. It's quicker, it's cheaper, it's more sustainable, and they are then brought to a site and put together.
Yeah, as I was saying, Louise, I sit on the Green Square Accord, and we look at MMC all the time. But not everybody understands now.
No.
Final comment on procurement then, particularly around construction. There's always been a complaint or a moan, whether justifiable or not, that SMEs tend to lose out.
Yeah.
Councils are risk averse. What's the word? You've never lost your job by giving work to IBM. Something like that I've heard. I can't remember the phrase, but you know what I mean. The civil servant will never lose his job if he hands the work to an IBM. I mean, we're getting close to finishing. What are your views on that? Is that justified?
We have to spread it. We have to spread it around. If we are going to benefit from what COVID has done to us, we're going to be looking at the impact of people losing their jobs and new startups. We are going to have a huge number of new SMEs. And I think there is, across the political divide, there is support for there is encouragement for more support for SMEs. Homes England, particularly on the housing front, acknowledge this, and it's in their top 10 of, we really don't want to just be playing with the big companies all the time. We want to be able to make sure that we've got the middle and smaller size companies able to play in the construction and property game. So there is a very strong, not only a push, not only a policy towards it, not only sort of like nice words, but people are actually doing it. So I think we will see a change over the next 12, 18 months where the SMEs have a better chance of getting in and playing, because we're not just going to be talking about the big players, the top 5 house builders. It's going to be spread out. And there's also going to be the opportunity for better partnerships as well, for some of those bigger players to partner with some of the smaller players. And that will curry favour. One of the things I mentioned right at the very beginning is the social value of how we build, not only what we build, but how we build it, and the added benefits of what we do. That social value, environmental and social governance, the ESG of how people operate, how companies operate, means that all those very, very large companies are going to see benefits of partnering with smaller companies as well. So they spread the love. You know, that's the easiest way of looking at it.
And Louise, ESG, quick.
Environmental social governance. It's if anybody's following the markets, you'll be very much aware of this, where you've got shareholders who now don't just look at the bottom line. They look at how a company's got to their bottom line. They look at how they operate, how diverse, how inclusive are they. They look at the social value, the added benefit of what that particular company is doing. All that is wrapped up in something called environmental social governance, and it's becoming very important, which is a very, very positive move in my eyes for the markets, for the investment markets, to acknowledge that money's important. Of course, it's always going to be important, but it's how you get to that money and how you operate, which is also increasingly important.
Louise, it's been fascinating. 40 minutes are there or about already. Just a quick cap, and feel free if I've got this wrong. The high street will change, but for the positive. Digital is going to make a big difference in planning permission and how we put our plans through and how government reacts. There will be blockers, and they're normally cultural, but they always have been. And hopefully with the new generation, that will come through. You mentioned, we now need to embrace not just planning, but how we construct homes. You talked about MMC, the modern way of construction. You've talked about how private and public sector now need to work together.
Very much so.
You've talked about the role of SMEs now and the kind of roles they will play. And of course, this is all part of the levelling up agenda. You know, we need to build houses all around the country, not just have hotspots where we do tend to see hotspots. So I think, your profession has got a big role to play in that, in making sure that happens. I think during your illustrious career, you've seen many changes, particularly around diversity and inclusion. And in your eyes, I'm not going to disagree with you. It's looking very positive. You've just talked about the stock market and how investors are now looking at investments differently. They're looking at the environment, the social, the way they're being governed. So a lot of change, but a lot of positive change.
I think so.
And I think, Louise, if we've got people around you, like you, in the profession, I think we're going to hit all these boxes. And I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to go because I suspect my Amazon parcel is going to arrive any second now. And I've been so grateful. I did hear just for a second somebody drive past with their music on loud, and I could hear the hip hop, and I thought, oh, crikey, this is going to completely take. Thankfully, they drove quite quickly. So anyway, listen, thank you very much for your input. It's been brilliant. Been brilliant. I look forward to obviously reading some great more articles in the Business Influencer. And you never know, we might even catch each other at a future Signature Awards. Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your input. Bye-bye.